Good morning, everybody.
There you are.
Morning. I'll be there in a minute.
Well, we love to see you,
I know you do.
but I have to tell you, we're really excited that Reverend Lynn is here. She's been gone for a few weeks. So, as much as we want to see you, John, we were very excited to see Lynn today. And she's here. She's definitely had a difficult last couple weeks. And I just want to remind people, if you didn't see the post we put up for her son, her boy, we're raising money. He had some really serious surgery that's affecting his mobility. We're praying for his return to full strength and for miracles, but we're also being practical. So if you see the GoFundMe, I don't post a lot of GoFundMe's, but this one's a really important one. So please, it's on our Facebook page, and it's for one of our own. And when I say one of our own, somebody who's helped make our community great. This family is an important part of our community for decades. I'm talking about like 5 or 6 decades is what I'm talking about. So when I'm telling you that Santa Clarita would not be the place that it was, and look, we got some challenges out here we've had for a long time, but it would be a lot more challenging and a lot less filled with compassion if it wasn't for Reverend Lynn. So, and and I've met her son before. Actually, I think wasn't he involved with the tree a little bit? Was that a different? Was that a difference with the tree when we were trying to save the Old Glory? Son-in-law. That's right. That was your son-in-law. I didn't think it was Matt. Yeah, I wasn't sure, but yeah. Anyways, get on that. And so far, there's been a good response, but we need a great response. Anyways, so today, my friends, we were off for a couple weeks because of the break. And we're very close to the end of the whole Tanakh. Oh, look, everybody's here today, right? Look, little, we're getting Judith involved here today. Everybody's here. And yeah, so we were on the end coming to the end of Chronicles, which is obviously the end of the Bible, as we said. And so this is coming to the end of the telling of the kings. A lot of Chronicles, as we talked about, is repetition of Kings, but there's information in Chronicles that isn't in Kings, and there's information in Kings that's not in Chronicles, which is interesting because of what's there and what's also not there, what's chosen not to be there. And today, the part of Chronicles that we're going to read today, which deals with one of the kind of the outstanding kings, and I mean outstanding because he was really a good king, but he also lasted for a while because sometimes good kings don't have long lives. But he was a good king, did a lot of good things, and wasn't perfect. You're going to see, talks about his problems, but we get interesting things in the Book of Kings, and then we get some interesting things here in Chronicles, and that is the King Hezekiah. And there are very few kings in the dynasty. And remember, one of the things that Chronicles is phenomenally different from Kings on is that Chronicles is really not concerned at all with the kings of northern Israel. The only time the kings of northern Israel were mentioned was in relation to their relationship, by marriage and then by descendants in the kings of Judah. And so when we went through those interesting crossovers during the time of King Ahab and his family, that's about the only time that you hear about the kings of Israel. It's not the concern of Chronicles. Chronicles was edited well after the kings of Israel were history and were long gone. And so it's not the concern. But the kings of Judah are. But given that, there are very few kings from the time of Solomon to the last king Zedekiah, who's there when the Babylonians destroy the temple and is there taken in exile. There are very few kings that you need to even think about. I mean, really, they're for the most part not that significant. They're not that phenomenal. They're not that, quite frankly, they're not that good. And it shouldn't surprise us. because back in the day when we first got our king, King Saul, Samuel told the people, these kings are not going to be good. They're not good for you. You don't need a king. You have God. But the people demanded a king. They said, we have to have a king. Everybody else has a king. We need to have a king too. And so this is the problem. The people of the Jewish people need to have a king like everybody else, and of course, it doesn't go well for them. Just again, just to kind of give you a quick little refresher, we had this chart that we've been using. We used in Kings, and now we're back in it right now because you can see the scriptural references to it. So we talked about, and the kings of Judah go back when we go back to David and Solomon, and then we have the split kingdom during Rehoboam, and we have Rehoboam, and it will tell you, because sometimes they start off good and then end bad, and sometimes they start off bad and end good. So it kind of gives you a overview of what the feeling is. And what's interesting is sometimes in Chronicles and Kings, the overview, the judgment on them is a little different. So I'd say sometimes the evil or the good is a little bit harder to see in Chronicles. So again, this is where we had that Queen Natalia, who's terrible. It goes on a rampage and kills everybody, and they keep her grandson alive, Joash, and he's the one who ends up being king for a while. Starts off good and ends up no. But these kings don't really stand out, except for this king. Or this King Jehoshaphat is good. I mean, they're good kings. I mean, there's kings that are good, but they don't really stand out. They don't do anything significant, or they're not really involved in the text much. But we did read about this king Uzziah. Now, Uzziah is an interesting guy because we actually read about him in the prophet Isaiah. Isaiah talks about him. They talk about his. They talk about the fact he's going to have a son. Well, that line of Isaiah was interpreted by later people, primarily Christians, as that's Jesus. But Uzziah's son, who was going to be king, who Isaiah says will be called Emmanuel. We kind of celebrated his birthday back at Christmas, but the original guy that Isaiah is talking about is Uzziah's son, Yotam. And so, or perhaps Yotam's son Hezekiah, but it was a king that was born during Isaiah's lifetime. Both of those guys actually do pretty good, other than, again, we have this one king in the middle, Chaz, who's not so good. But Uzziah is very well known, and then Hezekiah is really well known. Uzziah, to remind you, we read about him last week. Uzziah does a lot of good things, does a lot of building, and then he gets leprosy. And his son Yotam ends up being king for part of the time that he's alive. No one even sees Uzziah. They put him up in a tower, and he doesn't even come into contact with people. So for the last years of his life, you can see he's king up until 740 when he dies. But his son became king 748. Remember, this is BCE, so this is backwards. So his son Yotam was king for 8 years while he was up from 748 to 740. Uzziah was up in a tower and no one saw him because he had leprosy, So he's an interesting king, and you can see he reigns for a pretty long time, for almost 30 years. And then Hezekiah is king here. That's the one we're talking about today. Well, we're going to talk about Yotam and Ahaz. But you can see Hezekiah is king for 30 years. And what's interesting is that we actually have a tunnel in Jerusalem called Hezekiah's Tunnel, and we've been in it before. It's that long tunnel that some people walk through. There's a dry tunnel and a wet tunnel, and the wet tunnel is you actually have to kind of wade through it. But Hezekiah's Tunnel is there. We discovered it. We'll talk about it when we read about it. But yeah, he was a pretty important guy. I want to remind you, and I kind of finished it off, and we rushed through it because we were talking about Uzziah last time. But Uzziah um, must have been a pretty significant guy. But I told you the interesting thing about him was that we have a song about Uzziah. When Israel was being rebuilt back in the 40s and 50s, they turned, and I played this for you before, but I just want to play a little bit again because you'll remember it. I played you the it was hold on one second. It was not on my playlist. Um, it was this song that I played for y'all, and I'll play it a little bit for you again, just so you remember. King Uzziah. I'm gonna play it right now. Don't go anywhere. Here's your little Melech Uzziyahu. Here you go. So this was a big song back in the 60s, and it was a big Israeli dance song for many, many years, including actually today. Oh, So Vayiven Uzziyahu means Uzziah built Migdalim. Uzziah built towers. So it's a line, just one line we read from Chronicles, which isn't in Kings, by the way, but it is in Chronicles. What's interesting again about that is that it's just almost a throwaway line. It's not a line that you necessarily would go, oh, that tells us a lot about who he was, other than he was a builder. So again, this was all the stuff about Uzziah. This is the line that he built. He built towers and corners, and he built like siege ramps. And then it says, when he grew strong, he acted corruptly, and he trespassed against God by entering the temple. And then he gets hit by the leprosy. He gets hit by the leprosy when he does that. Yeah, he was arrogant. Yep. Yep. Yeah, he's not a priest. Yeah. Yep. So it's a chilling scene. It's obviously not something people are going to sing about, but it shows you what happens when kings get out of their place. And again, it says he was cut off. Um, and he couldn't go back in, obviously, because you're never going to go back in if you're lepers. So you can't go back in. So we want to make sure he doesn't go back in. God hit him with leprosy. He's never coming back in again. He's not ever coming out. So yeah, that punishment is super, super. It's karmic payback, if you will, because here's the guy who's king who never can be seen again, and it's 8 years. I mean, according to that. So it says that's what we finished off with. And it says it was recorded by Isaiah. That's the Isaiah who's the prophet, Isaiah, son of Amos. So it says, hey, check out the book of prophet Isaiah if you want to know more. Okay. So, yeah. So that's kind of what we finished with. Now, I do want to tell you one other thing. As I was thinking about that song about Vayiven Uzziyahu, which I love that song because it gets faster and faster, and people just like start moving around and they dance faster and faster. The Israeli dance, this was like, and I was thinking about it because over the break because I was watching something about folk music and and it was weird how many songs from the Torah from the Bible were big back then. Like Pete Seeger brought all these songs, like obviously the Ecclesiastes, about taking turn, taking words from the Bible, but some of them were Hebrew. Some of them weren't even in English. Some of them weren't even translated. They turned songs like Tsena Tsena and these songs got Harry Belafonte would do them and they would always share these songs and they have and that's why you have a Bird's version of Turn and you have Seegers and these guys all share they shared their music. It's a weird thing too. You look at the 60s, you have Carole King, sings "You Got a Friend," and then two months later, James Taylor records. They didn't care. They were happy to have other people record their songs. But yeah, these songs that were popular. Um, Gosh, I mean, you think about what's happened, the politics of it, and the fact that could you imagine that? I mean, what I'm saying is, you know what I'm saying. There were kids on Berkeley campus in the 60s dancing to Tsena Tsena, dancing to an Israeli folk song. Think about that. Think about that. That's what it was 60 years ago. Can you imagine? Can you imagine doing an Israeli folk dance on Berkeley campus right now? It's amazing. Like I thought about it and I was like, "Oh my God." Like musical that little thought just I couldn't wrap my head around it. But as I was thinking about this and kind of like doing the deep dive on that, so I looked I looked at that song I just played you, Vayiven Uziyahu. Do you know who sang on that album or helped produce that with Barry? I told you Barry McGuire also did. His big song was Eve of Destruction, which is very biblical and very scary and talks about the war and talks about the fact that it seems like we're in almost an apocalyptic time. But here's the crazy thing about who sings on that album. Somebody could look it up. I'm going to tell you. This is something that you just won't, because it goes back to folk music, right? So Barry McGuire, that album I just played you, that song I just played you, singing in the background there with them, showcasing his stuff with them, was Alan Sherman. Yeah, that Alan Sherman. Hello, Mudda, hello, Fa. Yeah, Camp Granada. That's Alan Sherman was singing and touring with Barry McGuire. So I thought about that because obviously he's known for that song most of all, but he wrote a lot of Jewish parody songs, a lot. So if you go back through Alan Sherman's catalog, you'll see, and a lot of the songs sound the same, but he was the first like Weird Al. I mean, he was the guy. And so yeah, he's on that song I just played for you. He was performing. So yeah, he had a very sad life. I think he died like maybe in his 40s, 39, 40. He was very young when he died and didn't take care of himself. He had a really kind of tragic life for a guy who was funny. He did not have a funny life. Anyway, so yeah, I thought that was weird that Alan Sherman was singing with Barry McGuire, but he was a folk singer too, Alan Sherman. Anyways, so that's a little history of folk music, which I obviously, why do I care? That's the music I was raised on. I mean, that was just the music that my mom played when I was a kid, and I lived on that music. I mean, that was my music. Kind of explains, but it also, but in all seriousness, it also, I talk about the things that like, made me weird. It took me a long time to get into rock music. I was way stunted on rock music because I listened to that kind of music. And my dad listened to R&B, so I was I was not a normal white kid from the San Fernando Valley. I was like in some weird zone of not listening to the music that my peers were listening. It took me a while. Anyways, but it is great music and definitely for me it brings back memories. But let's get into the text. Let's get into the these kings, and we're going to read today. Um, we're going to read. We read about Uzziah last time, and now we're going to read about Hezekiah and a little bit of the guys in between, Yotam and Ahaz. But let's read about him, and you'll see why I say they're standouts. And Uzziah was one, and then Hezekiah will be today. So, Rosemary, it's good to see you online. Hope you
Same
had a good
here.
break too,
Yes,
and hope you had a good Hanukkah in San Jose.
I did.
So, here we go with the last kind of 10 chapters or so of Kings, of Chronicles, sorry, of our Kings.
Yotam was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Jerusha, daughter of Zadok. He did what was pleasing to God, just as his father Uzziah had done, but he did not enter the temple of God. However, the people still acted corruptly.
So we're not going to get a lot about Yotam, but we do know that he was good, and Uzziah did mostly good stuff until he went into the temple. But he didn't do that. So he didn't do the bad stuff. He did good stuff like his dad did, and then he didn't do the bad stuff. But the people were still not doing right. And so for that, he's kind of held a little bit responsible because the people were still not worshiping God correctly. So that's the knock on him. That's the only knock we have on him so far. But that's the way he's introduced to us. And he's young, right? He's young when he takes over. And if you do the math, if he's 25 years old when he becomes king, which is while his dad is still alive, his dad's still alive, he still doesn't live a very long time if he reigns for 16 years. Remember, because these are lifetime jobs. So unless you get leprosy, in which case you're still there, but you're not really acting maybe as king. But here's what it says about him. Yeah.
It was he
Wait,
who
hold
built.
1 second, Rosemary. 1 second. What? Why? Did they hide Uzziah? Everybody see it. Did everyone see his leprosy? They probably didn't. No, but they knew where he was. They knew he was supposed to be out, and he wasn't. Of why he did? Yeah, we would assume. Yeah, but what's interesting is what Uzziah does wrong is almost like it's bad. It's really bad. You're not supposed to go into the Beit Hamikdash unless you're inside, unless you're a priest. But at least he was worshiping God. What the other people are doing is not worshiping God. Now, again, I don't want to say that's worse. I'm not here to say what's worse because Uzziah, the judgment on Uzziah was he's still a good guy. He just was arrogant and he did what he was not. He did not do what a king is supposed to do. But the people are not worshiping God. Now, by the way, when it says the people still acted, the od ha'am mashchitim, which is that they're doing bad stuff, it seems to imply that they were doing it under Uzziah's watch as well. So it's just he's also not good at getting the people to do the right thing. How do you get to the people to do the right thing? You go through and you cut down all the altars, right? Which is I'm not going to ruin it for you, but that's what we already read. That's what some of the kings do. So when the kings are good, what do they do? Okay. Now I'm gonna say this because we've talked about it, and we're not even reading between the lines. Sometimes that judgment is coming from the priests, right? When it says they cut down the high places and they cut down the shrines, sometimes they're talking about shrines to Baal. Sometimes they're talking about shrines to God. They're just not Jerusalem shrine, the shrine. So it's hard to know sometimes whether the priestly writers are talking about places where people are worshiping other gods or whether they're worshiping God not in Jerusalem. They're both a problem to the priests. And when a king does the right thing, he pulls those things down. He goes through and so what does he do? He does the job for the priests. Yes, but now in this one, I'm talking about what he does here, what Yotam does. I don't know that the people are arrogant. I mean, that's part of it, but the main thing is they're not worshiping the right God. They're worshiping other gods. That's what the priests are really upset about. Though they're also, yeah, when they're saying corruptly, they're talking about this word is the word mashritim is the word when they're talking about not worshiping the right God. It's sometimes hard to know whether it's also again just not worshiping God in the right place. But here's some of the building that he does. And again, what his father Uzziah did.
It was he who built the upper gate of the house of God. He also built extensively on the wall of Ophel. He built towns in the hill country of Judah, and in the woods he built fortresses and towers.
And so he built around Jerusalem, but he also built outside of Jerusalem, right? The area that he built, the Ophel, that is the area that we've walked around in the city of David. The Ophel is that area. We are uncovering it. So this area that he built, we are uncovering now. And we know that it was built during this time. The interesting thing is that while we don't have a lot from this period, we start to get stuff. I told you already, from 100 years before, we already have references that we found that testify to this. Here we found stuff from these people, and we're excavating exactly what it says they have, which is these constructions that were after King David and King Solomon in this area that we call the Ophel. And again, it's right outside of the wall. It's right outside of the western wall. So, but it also says that he built in the country, in the hill country of Judah. So he also builds up defensive positions.
Moreover, he fought with the king of the Ammonites and overcame them. The Ammonites gave him that year 100 talents of silver and 10,000 cores of wheat and another 10,000 of barley. That is what the Ammonites paid him, and likewise in the second and third years. Yotam was strong because he maintained a faithful course before the eternal his God.
Yes, sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes these kings do the right thing and they're still not successful or live long or, you know, have, have the right kinds of things happen. Oh, I forgot to stream us. Sorry. Let me just put it up on Facebook quickly. So what happens here is everything it seems is going pretty good during Yotam's time. Hold on one second. And you know, again, we'd like it to happen like this more often. Doesn't always happen, and that is part of the craziness that I guess we take away from the Bible itself, which is sometimes things don't work out the way they should. Here's what it says about him.
The other events of Yotam's reign and all his battles and his conduct are recorded in the book of the kings of Israel and Judah. He was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. Yotam rested with his ancestors and was buried in the city of David. His son Ahaz succeeded him as king.
You see what I'm trying to make a point. The guy lived 41. Seems like a pretty good king to me. So there's no explanation for it. It doesn't say why he died. It didn't say he got hit by some horrible heart attack or whatever. There's no explanation for why this guy only lives to be 41. So it doesn't work out well. We don't know why. We doesn't say why he died. Doesn't say he was killed in battle, so we assume he's not. I mean, they would have said that. But the guy does what's right and doesn't get a long life. So, there's not even anything to say. There's 9 verses about the guy. So what? No, we've had it. Ir David has been mentioned. Yeah. And one of the things that's interesting about it is we mentioned, because we did mention this, is Ir David, the city of David, is not inside the old city wall. We mentioned this. That's why when we talk about the city of David excavations going on, remember it's going on in the Silwan Valley, or the Silwan, the area of Jerusalem called Silwan. This is not in the old city. But as I told you, it's not without tremendous, you know, problems or politics because the area was not inside the old city. It's technically in East Jerusalem, and so people have objected to the excavations that are going on there. So they tried to keep some of the buildings and then excavate underneath, but in some cases they took over homes. Again, these are not taking over homes to build Jewish homes, but it is excavating history. Now, so it's had political ramifications in Israel and in the world. I did make the point that Silwan was not an ancient. It's not an ancient. These are not ancient homes. These are not people have lived in these homes for generations upon generations. These are not people's fields where these were essentially areas outside of the old city where people started building in the 1900s, 1920s, 1930s, where they started building there. These are not ancient homes. I'm not saying that because I would tell you if they were ancient homes. These are not ancient homes. Again, they're still people's homes, but they were not farms, family farms that were passed down through the generations, which is another issue which has been going on in the West Bank for the last 60 years. This is not that. That being said, it's here's the real problem. When Israel was controlled by the British, the Turks maintained land records. The British did not do a great job of maintaining land records when they controlled it for 30 years. The Jordanians did nothing to keep records when they controlled it from 48 to 67. So from basically 1917 to 1967, nothing was built with permits, nothing was built with ownership. And there are no records of who owns this land. So nobody has any there's no documentation of who owns this. So the Israeli government says, we don't have to essentially, you don't own this. You're squatting on this land. I'm not talking about all of the West Bank. I'm talking about the Silwan. And so they said, you can't be here. You never were supposed to build here in the first place. And I'm telling you, these homes have not been built with, we look at them when we're you can see them. They are not built with any type of safe construction or anything else. So that's part of the issue, is that there's not really an ownership of this property, though again, some people, the family has lived there for 60 years. So it's not like they, weren't there for 200 years or 500 years, but they've been there for 50 or 60 years. And look, Israel hasn't encroached on parts of Silwan that aren't they haven't really encroached on anything other than areas that they're excavating and areas that they needed for transportation, for roads. But it's a difficult question. I mean, ethically, it's an interesting question. If people don't have ownership, if their family never bought the property, if their family never, never attained ownership, do they own it? At what point? So it's an interesting legal and ethical question, but one that we're talking about just outside of Jerusalem. We're talking about the area literally just outside of the old city walls. So the area of Silwan is like it literally was like a suburb, and it is built right over these tombs. And again, these are not homes that were. I'll show them to you again, just to remind people. The homes are they're in this valley here, and as you can tell, I mean, these were not there for generations, and like I said, they were not necessarily built with any type of building code so this is literally what is around Jerusalem in the Silwan Valley. So you can see it goes up the hill, goes down the hill. That's the Mount of Olives behind it. So this is literally just outside of the old city. Well, it's called East Jerusalem. This is East Jerusalem. It is, but it's a part of the West Bank that we call East Jerusalem. So part of East, well, let me rephrase that. Some people call it the occupied West Bank. Israel annexed all of Jerusalem. So Israel 30 years, 40 years ago said this is all part of Israel. East Jerusalem is part of Israel. So, but technically is on the side that was controlled by the Jordanians up until 1967. So when the Jordanians and the British controlled this, nobody stopped anybody from building here. Again, some of these places were built, I want to make this clear, some of these homes were built in Silwan were built in 1992. So Israel allowed people to construct and still lets people construct. Well, yes, they still let people construct. There's construction going on like right now. It's not permitted, and it's not like they went and got a permit to do it, but there are people that are building in this area. They just build another level on their house. So there is building still going on there. And again, Israel really only cares when it's encroaching. Well, they care about the safety and security issues, but they really only care and will take down the house if it's encroaching or they need to build a road or they need to they're continuing excavation. So 20 years ago or 30 years ago in the 90s, when they started building the city of David as an open excavation for people, by the way, because they had been excavating there since 67. Since Israel took the West Bank and Jerusalem, they started excavating there. But when they started opening it to the public, that's when they did it. Now, we will be going there because I just went on the itinerary for November. We just got our November 2026 trip. We're going there, and they just opened up what's called the Pilgrimage Road, which is a pilgrim. They opened it, and then they were going to open it to the public, and they didn't. It will be opened. It will be opened. It is opened, I think, or opening in March to everybody again, and it never really opened. And we're going to go there in November. Now, the area below, which is where it starts from, then goes up the hill into the old city, that pool of Siloam in the Bible is called the Pool of Siloam. You've heard of the Pool of Siloam. It's where Jesus healed people when he was in Jerusalem. It's because that's where the pilgrims would go and bathe and go into a mikvah. We found the mikvahs. The Pool of Siloam, when we were there this last November, Randy was there. They were excavating it. It was still being worked on. You remember the tunnel you walked through, Randy, in Jerusalem, the old city? That's where we're talking about right now, and that's where Hezekiah's tunnel is. So Hezekiah's tunnel is right there. It goes from the city of David excavations into the old city, and then this is now the pilgrimage road is going to be opened for the public too. But it wasn't until recently. No. Nope. Bethlehem is further away. And so Bethlehem is like 10 miles south. And so that area is in the West Bank. And Bethlehem is pretty much completely controlled by the Palestinian Authority. So when you go into Bethlehem, it's almost like you're not in Israel anymore. You're under the authority. There are no Israeli police. In Bethlehem, there are Israeli soldiers nearby, but the governance and the rule of that area is by the Palestinian Authority. It's a little scary. No, it's a little scary. The reason is that Israel has said you guys are in charge. You guys are in charge of this. So like when you go into Bethlehem, we can't even have an Israeli guide. So once we go into Bethlehem, we only are allowed to have Palestinian guides. No Israeli guides are allowed to take you around Bethlehem. So the Israeli guide does not come in. It's only the Palestinian guide. So Bethlehem becomes becomes, well, it's not the city, it's the city where David is from, but the city of David is the Jerusalem part. Bethlehem is called the city of David because that's where he was born. And that's, of course, where Jesus will be born. But the story of Jesus being born there was kind of created so that he could be born in the same town as his ancestor David. The story of Jesus being born in the manger and being born there was kind of a midrash because we know that Jesus was from Nazareth. Now, the story is that Jesus' family came down. That's what we read about it at Christmas, was they came down for the counting for a census, which, by the way, if it was the census, then it was being done during the time of Passover. So he would not have been born anywhere near December. But forget that. Forget the dating. The dating also would have placed it at about 4 BCE, which means Jesus wasn't born in year 1. It was -4, if you will. Anyways, the point is, because we know that there was a census that people came to that year. Anyways, the point is that story that allows for Jesus' parents to be in Bethlehem at that time means that they were coming to Jerusalem for that census and then stayed there because they stayed on the outside of town when they were there because they couldn't stay in Jerusalem. It's possible, but it's also not the right direction. If they were coming from Nazareth, they would probably have stayed north of it. I don't want to get hung up on it because the story is there for a reason. It's there to tell us that Jesus was actually born in Bethlehem and not in the north. I wouldn't have even thought it would have been that important, but it was important for the book of Matthew, for Matthew and early Jewish Christians. It was important to establish that Jesus was, in fact, from the same city as David. But that's not, when they're talking about city of David here, they're talking about Jerusalem, or that part of Jerusalem. They're not talking about Bethlehem. No, I'm saying he was conceived in Nazareth. I'm saying the story of him being, no, I'm saying the story, I'm saying he probably didn't come. I'm saying this, he didn't have to come to Bethlehem for a census. They had census takers that went to the different cities. People said they did the census, and they did. I mean, there's a justification for it. It's not made on nothing. The justification is that some people came to Jerusalem for the pilgrimage holidays. The census would have been done in Jerusalem and had more accuracy, if you will, because people were coming into town and they would have a better chance of counting people, if you will. That was the logic behind it. It's not really necessary from the standpoint that there were census takers that went into the north as well. Whatever it was, however this was done, Jesus' family coming to Jerusalem for a holiday would have been a normal occurrence. The whole idea of the census and all that kind of stuff is all based on like our imagination. It's all based on why we're going to place them there and whether it was around the same time. The Christian Bible doesn't say they were there for the census of Quirinius. It doesn't say that anywhere. It doesn't have to. Again, I'm not saying it has to, but it doesn't. So, you know what? It's much better, by the way. Hold it one second. I'm just gonna show it to you because it's much better for me to not. So let me just pop it up here. So sorry. Let me just get up. So let me just put this up real quick. So to answer this question, this is the genealogy of Jesus from chapter 1, which I want to just show you real quick because obviously this is from Chronicles. We just read about Uzziah and then Yotam and then Achaz and then Hezekiah. And we get all these kings and we get through the next list of kings. And then, of course, what happens after the kings is the exile. And these are Jesus's descendants or ancestors before, from the time of Yes, but they're the ancestors of Jesus from the time of the exile, right? So 14 generations from Abraham to David, 14 from David to the exile, and 14 from the exile to the Messiah. That seems a little too perfect. It probably wasn't. And again, some of these, we have no knowledge of these ones, but again, it seems a little too neat. But this is what it says. When Jesus was born, it says, this is what it says. Um, that is the visit. That's the birth. Now, this is the whole thing from the birth. Okay. Oh, wait. Yeah, this is the one that we go to because it's got the most Jewish version of this. So this is the angel. The virgin will conceive and bear a son. That line we said is from Isaiah. This is the line from Isaiah. His name will be Emmanuel. Joseph woke up, heard the message. He believes it, and this is what it says. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem during the time of King Herod, it says, the Magi heard from the east. They came, where is the one who was born the King of the Jews? When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed. Now, I want to ask you one question. Where does it say here? Where does it say here how Jesus' parents got into Bethlehem? This is the most Jewish of the Gospels, Matthew. Where does it say that happened? It says he's born in Bethlehem. And why does it say he's born in Bethlehem? Because the Messiah in Bethlehem of Judea, this is the prophecy, right? It's from the prophet Micah. So they have the whole search for the child, where Herod wants to find the boy. And yeah, and then it says they went to Egypt. What? Outside of the Bible. Yes, but here's all of Jesus' birth we know about. It says after he was born, they went to Egypt. They escaped to Egypt because they didn't want Herod to kill their son. They moved, and again, they quote the Bible here again. A voice is heard in Ramah. This is from, again, this is from Jeremiah. This is the text that we actually read on Rosh Hashanah. This little part here from Jeremiah, chapter 31. He goes to Egypt. Doesn't say anything about what happens when he's in Egypt, and it says he had a dream, like Joseph. A lot of biblical references here. And they took the child and they went back to Judea, and it says they lived in a town called Nazareth. So was fulfilled, was said to the prophet, he would be called a Nazarene. That's it. That's what the Christian Bible says about what happened to him. Now, there are other versions of that, right? There's this version of it. There's this version of it, which is only slightly less descriptive. This is John the Baptist talking about him being born. This is the book of Mark. Book of Mark says Jesus came from Nazareth in the Galilee. It doesn't say one word about him being from Bethlehem. Why? Well, maybe because Mark doesn't really care what necessarily the Jewish community says. Here's the book of Luke, which gives us some interesting stories, again about more about John and very much about John the Baptist being born, but also about his cousin. And here's what it says about here. This is where in Luke, who's the most Roman, where it says he's the one who says, not Matthew, but Luke, that this took place during the time of Quirinius, which in those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree, and Joseph went with his from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea. This is the first time we have this, to Bethlehem, the town of David, which is why Reverend Lynn said it sounds like they're talking about Bethlehem being the town of David, because it says it here. because he belonged to the house of the line of David. So he went there to register with Mary, who was pledged to be married to him and expecting a child. While they were there, the time came for the baby to be born, and she gave birth to a firstborn. And this is the story of the shepherds, which we also don't have in any of the other stories. So the Luke story is the one that has the most information of what we would say, that's what we know about Christmas. The only problem with Luke is that he's the least Jewish of the gospel writers. He's the one who knows the least amount of Jewish history, and that's what we have there. The point is that it's literally 3 verses. And that's all we have. So it's difficult to know what really happened with Jesus' birth because we have 3 different versions of it. And this is the only one that like gives us a reason why he's in why he's in Bethlehem if he's from Nazareth. Because here it says that he came from that the parents, that Joseph and Mary were living in Nazareth. They were living in the Galilee. So that's the only time where you get like kind of the story of what we know about Christmas. Well, that's why it is in Matthew. Matthew's the one where it has Joseph going, "Hey, what's going on?" Because that's very much like the story of Samson. When Samson is born, you've got Samson's dad, Manoah, going, "Hey, what are you talking about? My wife and I, we haven't had kids, and now suddenly my wife is going to have a kid because she sees a prophet." It's the same. It's the same story. So Matthew is very Jewish. Makes the most references to the Bible. It quotes Jeremiah. It quotes Micah. It quotes Isaiah. It mentions Joseph. It reframes the story of Samson. But Luke's story is the one that like we kind of it can kind of maybe that explains why he's in Jerusalem. But the other stories, one of the stories, the Mark story, doesn't even have him in Bethlehem. Matthew's story at least has him in Bethlehem. It doesn't really explain why. I don't know. So, not a thing. Not a thing about it. Canonical. Yeah. Well, we have Midrash, right? We have Midrash. Some people believe the Midrash, right? They believe the Midrash is the text, right? Look, it's the stuff that we have about Jesus is the Jesus story that we just read is very midrashic. Very midrashic. The fact that Herod wanted to find the babies and kill them or is scared about, that's exactly the story of Moses when he's the midrash that we have, which you've seen in the movies, is that Pharaoh goes crazy and wants to kill the Jewish babies, right? Well, I mean, that's in the Torah. But the fact that Moses is spared and lives in the house, but there's a very famous midrash we talked about, which is why Moses has a speech impediment. People think it's in the Torah, that he's tested. Rosemary, you know this midrash, right? He's tested by Pharaoh to see if he's trying to usurp him. And so he places a crown in front of baby Moses and a charcoal. And if he goes for the crown, then he's going to he wants to be the king. If he goes to the charcoal, it's okay. So he's about to reach for the crown. He's a baby. Of course he's going to reach for the crown. An angel knocks his hand away. He reaches for the coal, and then he puts the burning coal part of it in his mouth. And that's how he gets his speech impediment. So the Midrash is an explanation for why is Moses' tongue not good, because he says to God, my tongue isn't good at the burning bush. So the Midrash explains it. It also explains this interesting Midrash that Pharaoh is worried that someone's going to take away his power, which is exactly what we have in the story of Herod and Jesus. So these Midrashim are like, they're powerful stories. We all love those stories of the king who's worried that there's going to, I mean, obviously it's Greek mythology all over the place. But these are great stories, and they explain again, why does a ruler want to make sure that his, no one ever is as good as he is? Kind of weird, right? We've heard that story before. No one is ever going to be as great as me. So, including my own children, because remember, Herod killed 2 of his children. I told you guys about that. He killed 2 of his own sons. So, let's get back to the text. Yeah. No, not really. I look, you can say, okay, so Extra canonical means that somebody has said, well, it almost made the Bible. Yeah. So, no, that there actually is like a book. The Midrash, because it wasn't in like a fancy book or a collection necessarily until much later, isn't considered extra canonical because it wasn't edited in a version until like the Middle Ages. So we don't call it extra canonical. The example of extra canonical is the Book of Maccabees, because there's chapter 1 of Book of Maccabees and it was organized 2,000 years ago. But there really isn't a difference. There's a difference in the sense that somebody put it in a book and said, this is the story. But that's it. I mean, it's written at the same time. Some of it's written at the same time. And look, some of it's in the Talmud, so we know that it's old. So again, the Midrash is really, really powerful. And the more we are honest about it, the more we can say, oh, the Christian Bible has this Midrash in it. And guess why? Because it was written at the same time. Of course it does. It's only natural that it would. And again, if you want to read the book on that, that's Spong's book, Liberating the Gospels. So if you want to read a great explanation, easy to read explanation, read his Liberating the Gospels. Yeah. He's an Episcopal, Episcopal cardinal. What was his title? What rank did he get? Bishop. He got to bishop. Yeah, he was very well respected. Also controversial, but he wrote some great books, and that's one of my favorites, Liberating the Gospels. All right. If you want to read and it's very well written. It's very accessible. It's very accessible. Very accessible. All right. That's an easy way of saying it. There's not a lot of footnotes, and there's not a lot of, you have to be a biblical scholar. Everybody here would enjoy it and love it. All right. So let's take a look at the next king, Ahaz, who is also taking over when he's a young guy. All right.
Ahaz was 20 years old when he became king, and he reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. He did not do what was pleasing to God as his forefather David had done, but followed the ways of the kings of Israel. He even made molten images for the Baals. He made offerings in the valley of Ben Hinnom and burned his sons in the fire in the abhorrent fashion of the nations that God had dispossessed before the Israelites.
Yeah, and this guy, we'll read a little bit more.
He sacrificed and made offerings at the shrines on the hills and under every leafy tree.
Yeah, this guy goes completely bad, and he's worshiping idols, and it doesn't even it's what the Canaanites did, and they won't even call them the Canaanites. The people who lived here before, the Canaanites, we're not even call them by what, they're not even use the word Canaanite. These are horrible, horrible practices, and again, this is why we believed God kicked them out, because they did things like human sacrifice. So it says he sacrificed his sons in Ben Hinnom, in the Gay Ben Hinnom, right? The valley of Ben Hinnom, which is right outside of Jerusalem as well, right outside the wall. It's in Jerusalem. The Hinnom Valley, we walk through it all the time. It's right outside the walls. That valley of Hinnom, as we've talked about before, was a place where the Canaanites did these things. And then you have this horrible story of Jewish kings that are doing the same things. So again, these are ancestors, our ancestors. It's the ancestor that we just read in Matthew as the ancestor of Jesus. This is a bad dude. This is a guy who does really bad stuff. And as we mentioned, we've talked about it before, this valley of Ben Hinnom is called Gay Ben Hinnom. Gay means valley, and Ben Hinnom is the name of the valley. It was named after a guy named Hinnom, but Ben Hinnom, the valley of Ben Hinnom. But again, as we've mentioned, Gay Ben Hinnom becomes Gehenna, which is our word for hell in Hebrew. Gehenna is the version of this word Gay Ben Hinnom, because for us it became hell. Any place where humans sacrifice other humans must be hell. So yeah, Gay Hinnom becomes synonymous with hell. It's the same way that today we say some horrible place, like let's say Auschwitz. We say Auschwitz was hell. So we say, it's like Auschwitz, that's hell. That's what we called Hinnom. Gay Ben Hinnom was hell. And it became the word for hell. So when we talk about Gehenna in Hebrew or in Yiddish, That's where it comes from. That's comes from this place. It comes from this exact place. So in he in yeah, so in Hebrew and in the biblical text, the word for hell is Gehenna, Gehinom. In Yiddish, that's why we usually say Gehenna because it's Gehinom, but or in a Ge Ben Chinom to Gehinom to Gehenna. But in Yiddish, it sounds really good because if you say to somebody, "Go to hell," it's not very nice, but obviously it's not very poetic. But in Yiddish, it's the word for go is gay. So it's in Yiddish, it sounds great. Gay Gehenna means go to hell. But gay Gehenna sounds good. It's just an example of why Yiddish is better for curses. Gay Gehenna, if you say to somebody, gay Gehenna, go to hell. Uh, it's yeah, but it's only good for curses. I mean, we could do the curses in two weeks. The words that people would tell. Kishmir and tuchas. Words that people say. Kiss my rear. Everybody knows the word tuchas, but they don't know that the kishmir and tuchas. Yiddish is the best for that. But anyways, gay Gehenna means go to hell. Gay kaken off and yam, right? These words, gay. The word gay means go, right? These phrases are classic, and gay Gehenna is not something you should tell anybody, but if you did, that's why. So this guy does horrible stuff. He even again, according to this, sacrifices his own sons. Yeah, not a good guy. Now you'd think he must come to an end real quick, right? Here you go.
The Eternal, his God, delivered him over to the king of Aram, who defeated him and took many of his men captive and brought them to Damascus. He was also delivered over to the king of Israel, who inflicted a great defeat on him. Pekah, son of Remaliah, killed 120,000 in Judah, all brave fighters, in one day, because they had forsaken the eternal God of their ancestors. Zikri, the champion of Ephraim, killed Maaseiah, the king's son, and Azrikam, chief of the palace, and Elkanah, the second to the king. The Israelites captured 200,000 of their kin, including women, boys, and girls. They also took a large amount of booty from them and brought the booty to Samaria.
Yeah. So now we get the king of Israel again, but only because he is going to war against our king, the king of Judah. So you can see right here, this is Ahaz and Yotam, and here's Pekah. These are the kings of Israel. Now, they're not good kings. I mean, look at it. These guys are all evil, at least according to the Bible. None of these guys are good. They're all bad. This guy is good at first, Yehu, because he's actually made king to get rid of Ahab's family. But then, of course, he becomes bad. This is the prophet Elisha. It'd be no kings. So Pekah is here. He ends up being killed by Hoshea, who's the last king. But this is in this period right here, right? This is from 752 to 722. So this guy Pekah ran a revolt against these guys. This was constant. Every time you see a sun and then there's not a sun after, that means there was a revolt. That means there was a coup. There's a coup here. There's a coup here. There's a coup here. So you can see, from 752 to 722, these are all kings of Israel. Well, however corrupt and bad these guys are, this guy, Pekah, was able to capture and kill some of Yotam's, Ahaz's his own family, and then captures a lot of Israelites. So again, right here is where this red line is where the Assyrians destroy the kingdom in 722. And that's, of course, during King Hezekiah's time, which we're going to get to in a moment. But these guys, this guy Ahaz, he's a bad dude. Meanwhile, as you're going to see, He rules for as long as his father Yotam does. He doesn't live any less time than him, but whatever. So here we go.
A prophet of God by the name of Oded was there, who went out to meet the army on its return to Samaria. He said to them, "Because of the fury of the eternal God of your ancestors against Judah, they were delivered over to you, and you killed them in a rage that reached heaven. Do you now intend to subjugate the men and women of Judah and Jerusalem to be your slaves? As it is, you have nothing but offenses against the eternal your God. Now then, listen to me, and send back the captives you have taken from your kin, for God's wrath is upon you." Some of the Ephraimite chiefs, Azariah son of Johanan, Berechiah son of Meshilemot, Hezekiah son of Shallum, and Amasa son of Hadlai, confronted those returning from the campaign and said to them, "Do not bring these captives here, for it would mean our offending God, adding to our sins and our offenses, for our offense is grave enough, and there is already wrath upon Israel." So the soldiers released the captives and the booty in the presence of the officers and all the congregation. Then the men named above, proceeded to take the captives in hand, and with the booty they clothed all the naked among them. They clothed them and shod them and gave them to eat and drink and anointed them and provided donkeys for all who were failing and brought them to Jericho, the city of palms, back to their kin. Then they returned to Samaria.
That's an amazing story. We hadn't heard that story before. This is a story of Israelites capturing Judites and returning them and saying, yeah, you know what? This is probably not a good thing for us to make our brethren slaves. So that's a really interesting story. It's also a story it's not making, it makes Israel look kind of good, at least in this case. I mean, the fact that they went to, well, it makes them look very brave, right? That we have a prophet who's able to stand up to the kings of the north. And again, this is around the time of, again, this prophet Oded, his name is Oded. We don't know who he was. He's not mentioned in the books of Kings. He's not. We don't have a book of his, right? He's not in the book of prophets. He's not mentioned in the prophets. But he's at around the same time as the other prophets that we know of in the north. You know who some of those northern prophets are? You know some of them. I'll show you. These are some of the prophets you know of in the north. Amos and Hosea and Jonah and Micah. Yeah, that Jonah. Book of Jonah. He lived around this time. So we know that there were prophets in the north. We know that there were prophets who were trying to get people to do the right thing. And sometimes they do. Sometimes they do. So this is the time when the Assyrians are in the background. They're in the background. Maybe Aram and maybe all these other countries are attacking other countries because they know there's another country in the background that's going to attack them soon. So we better consolidate and get as much as we can, and we better when something in the background is looming, that sometimes it causes chaos a little closer to home, if you know what I mean. So let's read what happens.
At that time, King Ahaz sent to the king of Assyria for help. Again, the Edomites came and inflicted a defeat on Judah and took captives.
Well, so King Ahaz is getting beat all over the place. The Edomites, Israelites, all these countries are hurting him. And so what does he do? He goes to the Assyrians for help. It's not a good idea. But he's a bad guy. But you can understand why he did it. He went to the most powerful country in the area for help. Whew. It's not good, making a deal with the devil.
And the Philistines made forays against the cities of the Shephelah and the Negev of Judah. They seized Beth Shemesh and Aijalon and Gederot and Succoth with its villages and Timnah with its villages and Gimzo with its villages, and they settled there.
That means there were still Philistines around that are still causing problems. They took the opportunity. Yeah.
Thus God brought Judah low on account of King Ahaz of Israel, for he threw off restraint in Judah and trespassed against God. Tilgat-Pilneser, king of Assyria, marched against him and gave him trouble instead of supporting him. For Ahaz plundered the house of God and the house of the king and the officers, and made a gift to the king of Assyria to no avail.
Yeah. What a loser. He cannot catch a break because he goes to the Assyrians and say, Assyrians, please help me. I'm getting attacked by all these countries. So we'll pay you. We'll be your friends, whatever you want. And Syrians go, we don't need to help you. We'll just take the stuff. So this is not a good situation for this guy. He just everywhere he turns, he makes mistakes. And of course, he's a bad guy. He's sacrificing his kids. Maybe he's sacrificing his kids because there's no answers. But you don't go make it worse, right? He makes it worse. Ugh, terrible, terrible. What a bad guy this guy causes. Now, his dad, Yotam, was a good guy. His son is going to be a good guy. The rabbis derive from that is just because your dad is good doesn't mean you're good. And just because your dad is bad doesn't mean you're going to be bad. Look at this guy. This guy, Ahaz, is right between two good guys.
In his time of trouble, this king Ahaz trespassed even more against God, sacrificing to the gods of Damascus that had defeated him, for he thought, the gods of the kings of Aram helped them. I shall sacrifice to them, and they will help me. But they were his ruin and that of all Israel.
Yeah. They don't even, you can understand. Like the guy's reaching out everywhere. You can't understand. I mean, he explains it. It tells you. Yeah, he just was grasping at straws. Like, I just got to figure out something. And that, by the way, is what most people did in the ancient world. If if they were destroyed by a bigger army, they said, "Well, that God there is better than my God. Why am I worshiping this God? This God couldn't protect me from that God." And that's what normally people did. Not always, not always, but most of the time. That's the logical thing. What this guy did is the logical consequence of hey, my God ain't good. Not that I'm not good, not that I'm not following God the way I'm supposed to do, but this God is powerless. That's one of the differences that we had. We said, hey, we said maybe we're doing the thing wrong, which is why God isn't helping us. Now, we're not the only people who did that, by the way, and we know that because when we found the Mesha Stele in Jordan, we found out that the Ammonites and the Moabites and the Edomites, those other people that lived on the other side of the Jordan, who were very similar to us, they also sometimes think their God gets mad at them and delivers them up to the other peoples because we read the Moabite King Mesha saying, yeah, our God delivered us up to the Jewish God because we weren't doing the right thing. So sometimes it wasn't just us that sometimes we would say, maybe we're the ones at fault because that guy does the same thing. Mesha does the same thing. So, anyways, this gives you a little view of what people would do in the ancient world. So,
Ahaz collected the utensils of the house of God and cut the utensils of the house of God to pieces. He shut the doors of the house of God and made himself altars in every corner of Jerusalem. In every town in Judah, he set up shrines to make offerings to other gods, vexing the eternal God of his ancestors. The other events of his reign and all his conduct, early and late, are recorded in the books of the kings of Judah and Israel. Ahaz rested with his ancestors and was buried in the city in Jerusalem. His body was not brought to the tombs of the kings of Israel. His son Hezekiah succeeded him as king.
yes. So this guy was just a complete abject failure. He sells, he strips the temple of its gold, cut the utensils, right? The clay in Hebrew is utensils, right? The um the bowls, the cups, all the things of value that were made out of gold and silver that were there. Uh, you know, um, he he robs from the temple. Uh, um, and what does he, what does he get out of it? Nothing. It ends up, it ends up becoming a complete disaster. Um, Everything he touches, you know. So if Isaiah, I'm just going to show you real quick. Um, the prophet Isaiah, all the great prophets are working during this time. Well, that's kind of that's not a nice thing to say. The prophets that you know, Isaiah, Micah, Hosea, they're all working during this time. It's not Elijah was already 100 years earlier. Elisha were those very dramatic prophets. But the literary prophets, the prophets that you guys know really well, they're working during this period. And the reason that it's such an important period is because of what's going on with Assyria, the first great empire in the world, the first great empire in the world. Really, I mean, look it up. They're the first great empire, and um, they are. We read the prophets already, but again, we read them a while ago, and so. When we read in Isaiah, for example, I'm just going to show you Isaiah real quick, Isaiah chapter 7. Um, you know, Isaiah goes to King Ahaz, and remember, Isaiah worked for Uzziah. He goes to Ahaz, and he says to him, "Look, you're doing the wrong thing, right?" Um, he says, "You think the Assyrians are going to help you? They're not going to help you." And he says to him in this really interesting line, "You're looking in the wrong place. You don't look to these kings. You don't look to these foreign leaders. You look to God." And he says to them, "Assuredly, my sovereign, you'll get a sign. Look, whoa. Look, the young woman, the child, and is about to give birth to a son. Whoa. Let her name be Emmanuel." That's not a sign, by the way. That was just me trying to hold up this a little so I could read this. The young woman is with a child and about to give birth to a son. Let her name be Emmanuel. By the time he learns to reject the bad and choose the good, people will be feeding on curds and honey. For before the Lord knows to reject the bad and choose the good, the ground whose two kings you dread shall be abandoned. He's telling them, you're worried about the Assyrians. You're worried about the kings of Aram. You're worried about the Israelites. I get it. But don't give up faith. Right? And I'm telling you right now, when he says my sovereign, he's talking about God. I mean, he says Adonai. It's not a great, translation necessarily, but that's why it's a capital S, because it's God. The young woman is with a child. He's saying your wife right now has a child inside of her. Now, is that Hezekiah? Most likely. And he's saying that child will he will be the future. He will be the hope. And he's going to he will see the end of this. And guess what? He did. Because we're going to read about him right now, because this is probably King Hezekiah. The problem is, it could be any kid. And of course, for Christians, this is Jesus. This line from Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14, gets mistranslated in the Greek too. There is a virgin who is going to give birth to a son, and let his name be Emmanuel. Now, what's interesting is that Hezekiah's name is not Emmanuel. Did he have another brother named Emmanuel? I don't know. Emmanuel means God is with us. So it's a name of hope that there's going to be a son. Now, he could say, Isaiah could be saying to him, you should call him Emmanuel. And he didn't. He called him Hezekiah instead. But this is the kid. This is the kid we're about to read about right now. This guy.
Hezekiah became king at the age of 25, and he reigned 29 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Abiah, daughter of Zechariah. He did what was pleasing to God, just as his forefather David had done.
Now, that's your introduction to him. You learn his mother, you learn how old he was. That's typical. But this time, it doesn't even talk about his father or his grandfather, because his father wasn't a good guy. His father was Ahaz. But his ancestor David is who they go back to. They go back to David. They say he was good like his ancestor David. Yeah. Check that out. They go all the way back. So Hezekiah is definitely an outstanding king. One that may have been, so important that Isaiah tells him, tells his dad, this is a special kid. Yeah, but but this guy's a standout, right? This guy, this guy is this guy Hezekiah is going to be one of those outstanding kings. Uh, so again, there is some understanding that um, so let me just show you this real quick. In the kings that we read about, the kings of Judah, again, since the time of Solomon, we really don't have many kings, at least, that are start off good and end good. We don't have many. Well, I just kind of ruined it for you. Hezekiah, Hezekiah's son is Manasseh, and he doesn't finish good. Now, again, this is our judgment on these kings. This is our judgment of our own kings. I mean, this isn't like, this is what we said about him. Yeah. All right. By the way, Isaiah, well, we'll get to it in a second. Yeah.
He,
Yeah.
He, in the first month of the first year of his reign, opened the doors of the house of God and repaired them. He summoned the priests and the Levites and assembled them in the east square. He said to them, listen to me, Levites. Sanctify yourselves and sanctify the house of the eternal God of your ancestors, and take the abhorrent things out of the holy place. For our ancestors trespassed and did what displeased the eternal our God, whom they forsook as they turned their faces away from the dwelling place of God, turning their backs on it. They also shut the doors of the porch and put out the lights. They did not offer incense and did not make burnt offerings in the holy place to the God of Israel. God's wrath was upon Judah and Jerusalem. They were made to be an object of horror, amazement, and hissing, as you see with your own eyes. Our ancestors died by the sword, and our sons and daughters and wives are in captivity on account of this. Now, I wish to make a covenant with the eternal God of Israel, whose rage may hopefully be withdrawn from us. Now, my sons, do not be slack, for God chose you to be in attendance, to render service, to minister, and to make offerings. So the Levites set to Mahat, son of Amasai, and Yoel, son of Azariah, of the sons of Kohat, and of the sons of Merari, Kish, son of Avdi, and Azariah, son of Yahalalel, and of the Gershonites, Joah, son of Zima, and Eden, son of Joah, and of the sons of Elizaphan, Shimri, and Yael, and of the sons of Asaph, Zechariah, and Mattaniah, and of the sons of Haman, Yahiel, and Shimei, and of the sons of Yedutun, Shemaiah, and Uzziel. And gathering their brothers, they sanctified themselves and came by a command of the king concerning God's ordinances to purify the house of God.
Yeah, and this is something we really don't hear about in Kings. Now, yeah, you've heard things like this, but these aren't the Kohanim. These are the Levites. So interestingly, he doesn't just get the priests to do things, he gets the Levites involved. Interesting. That's probably a good strategy, especially when you're wanting to establish the Levites have a role to play too in the temple, not just the Kohanim, not just the descendants of Aaron, but all the Levites, the whole tribe of the Levites. Yeah, well, but the Kohanim are there. Yeah. Well, yeah, he's getting rid of the stuff that was in the temple. We'll get to the stuff outside the temple. Yeah, right now he's talking about stuff inside the temple. He's saying that nobody's doing what they're supposed to be doing here, which seems to imply that like not even Uzziyahu and Yotam and the good guys were doing what was quite right. So he's like, we got to go back to the basics. We got to go back and do what we're supposed to do. And we don't really know what the Levites were doing before then. So he's getting the Levites to do it, and when the first thing they do is they clear out. This is the beginning. This is not it. This is just the first step. Is cleaning out the temple. So the Levites get involved. Then, and again, I would only say you don't really notice it because it's the Hebrew and the translation sometimes it gets a little lost. That was the Levites. Now it's the Kohanim.
The priests went into the house of God to purify it, and brought all the impure things they found in the temple of God out into the court of the house of God. There the Levites received them to take them outside to Wadi Kidron.
Yeah, so it's almost like they worked together, and the priests took out the stuff, and then they gave it to the Levites, and then the Levites took it out, and then they destroyed it, right? So the Kidron, the Wadi Kidron is the Kidron River, which is there right outside in the same area where Hinnom, it's the river that goes through those valleys. Going through there, we're going to take out, and they destroy these things.
They began the sanctification on the first day of the first month. On the 8th day of the month, they reached the porch of God. They sanctified the house of God for 8 days, and on the 16th day of the first month, they finished. Then they went into the palace of King Hezekiah and said, "We have purified the whole house of God, and the altar of burnt offering, and all its utensils, and the table of the bread of display, and all its utensils. And all the utensils that King Ahaz had befouled during his reign, when he trespassed, we have made ready and sanctified. They are standing in front of the altar of God."
Yeah, so he kind of undid what his dad had done. So again, we're not exactly sure how this guy did this, but I will give you one possibility in a minute.
King Hezekiah rose early, gathered the officers of the city, and went up to the house of God. They brought 7 bulls and 7 rams and 7 lambs and 7 he-goats as a purgation offering for the kingdom and for the sanctuary and for Judah. He ordered the Aaronite priests to offer them on the altar of God. The cattle were slaughtered, and the priests received the blood and dashed it against the altar. The rams were slaughtered, and the blood was dashed against the altar. The lambs were slaughtered, and the blood was dashed against the altar. The he-goats for the purgation offering were presented to the king and the congregation, who laid their hands upon them. The priests slaughtered them and performed the purgation rite with the blood against the altar to expiate for all Israel, for the king had designated the burnt offering and the purgation offering to be for all Israel. He stationed the Levites in the house of God with cymbals and harps and lyres, as David and Gad the king's seer and Nathan the prophet had ordained, for the ordinance was by God through those prophets. When the Levites were in place with the instruments of David and the priests with their trumpets, Hezekiah gave the order to offer the burnt offering on the altar. When the burnt offering began, the song of God and the trumpets began also, together with the instruments of King David of Israel.
Wow. Now that says that some of these instruments were King David's. Or King David's, the instruments of David. It doesn't say like his. They say they are the instruments, they're the utensils, or the here the word clay is translated as instruments, like musical instruments. And so they use them again. Now, are they the actual instruments that he used, or are they the instruments, the same types of instruments that he used? We don't know. But they go back to this kind of Davidic origin, which, he's going back to the beginnings. But the word clay in Hebrew means instrument or utensils. It's the same word. So Hebrew doesn't really give us a great distinction between whether it's a musical instrument or just some. But here, because they're talking about the trumpets and they're talking about they mention the Hatzerot, which are the trumpets, not shofars. These are trumpets, so they're metal trumpets that we take into consideration that this is probably the instruments, which means maybe the string instruments, maybe the same string instruments. So the word clay means instrument, which is why the word klezmer means klezmer, instruments of song. That's what literally klezmer means. It means instruments of musical instruments, instruments of singing. So that's what klezmer means. In the sense that, yeah. So, look, if an Orthodox person came into here and said, "We're taking this temple over and we're making it Orthodox," the pictures, the banners here on the wall would be taken away. Those wouldn't be here anymore because they're depictions. Well, they're depictions of people, so they might say that those shouldn't be in a synagogue. So that's about it. Other than that, I don't think our place would have to be cleansed too much. No, they'd be fine. Orthodox would have no issue with the booze, but the fact that we keep it under there is not for me. It's just so that there's no place to secure it over there. I figure no one's going to go under there. It's underneath the Torah. No one's going to touch it. But no, it's not because of that. It's just, yeah. Anyways, but yeah, there's not a whole lot of cleansing or purging that would have to take place here. But yeah, we have to
Hey,
assume that
Mark,
there were some idols there.
what about the Ezekiel picture? Sarah's picture.
It's not up right now. It's not up.
Oh, alrighty then.
The paintings on the walls behind us. Any human depiction would probably have a little bit of a problem. Not, by the way, that's not exactly true. There's Chabads that have pictures in them, as long as they're not like pictures of God and not depictions of angels. The angelic picture would definitely be problematic. but not the. But it's less of an issue again with with a non-three-dimensional drawing. So as long as it's not a three-dimensional drawing of a person or an animal, it's less of a problem. But if there were things here that were in the temple when Hezekiah comes in, they clearly were things that they said, no, that ain't Jewish. That's a Baal statue. Get rid of that. So these kings that allowed it, they didn't allow it, they put it there. It was their decision to put it there, so they had to get it out. And again, we don't know exactly what these things look like, but we know during the time of Hanukkah that the Greeks and the Jews who supported the Greeks put statues in the temple. We read about it a couple weeks ago on our Wednesday night class when we read about the book of Maccabees. The book of Maccabees doesn't even want to say what it was. They call it the abomination. They don't even say what it is. We want to know what it is. They just call it the abomination. Yeah, they don't really tell us what these things look like, but they're not supposed to be there. So he clears it out, and this is a huge rededication, right? It's like what the Maccabees did. And notice, by the way, 8 days. They did it for 8 days, just like the original time when this Solomon dedicated the temple. It has nothing to do with oil. It has to do with the fact that it's Sukkot. Well, this wasn't exactly Sukkot, but it was like Sukkot. All right. So what do?
All the congregation prostrated themselves. The song was sung and the trumpets were blown. All this until the end of the burnt offering. When the offering was finished, the king and all who were there with him knelt and prostrated themselves. King Hezekiah and the officers ordered the Levites to praise God in the words of David and Asaph the seer. So they praised rapturously, and they bowed and prostrated themselves. Then,
Oh, 1 second. So it says the words of David. So we assume these are the Hallel, right? It actually says the words Hallel in Hebrew. L'Hallel Adonai, the praise to God, is the Hallel. It says right here, Hallel Adonai. And it says in the words of David, in the words of David, and Asaph, HaHoseh. Asaph, it says, was a seer, a prophet, or someone who has visions, right? And we have the songs of Asaph. We have psalms that are called the songs of Asaph. So, we have some. I mean, some of the psalms are ascribed to Asaph. No, that is the songs of ascent, which we call in Hebrew Shir Hamalot. And there are several Shir Hamalot, which we assume are the psalms that they sang when they went up for pilgrimage, when they walked up that path. So we will do those when we go in November. We'll say some of the Shir Hamalot when you go up the path and you walk up. They would say these Psalms 121, 122. They would sing these psalms as they ascended to Jerusalem. So those are the songs of ascent. But Asaph is this guy. We really don't know much about him. We don't have a book of Asaph, but we have Psalms of Asaph, who we assume was, and again, was an important person, maybe during the time of King David. So Hezekiah is doing this beautiful reformation, this rededication.
Then Hezekiah said, "Now you have consecrated yourselves to God. Come, bring sacrifices of well-being and thanksgiving to the house of God." The congregation brought sacrifices of well-being and thanksgiving, and all who felt so moved brought burnt offerings. The number of burnt offerings that the congregation brought was 70 cattle, 100 rams, 200 lambs, all these for burnt offerings to God. The sacred offerings were 600 large cattle and 3,000 small cattle. The priests were too few to be able to flay all the burnt offerings, so their kindred, the Levites, reinforced them till the end of the work, and till the rest of the priests sanctified themselves. The Levites were more conscientious about sanctifying themselves than the priests.
That seems to be really weird. And it's in parentheses because it sounds parenthetical because it's the kind of like, oh, and by the way, which is really interesting that here we get this idea that the Levites were doing a better job than the Kohanim were. So that's not normal. And it's also interesting because most likely this was written by a priest. It was definitely edited by a priest. It was edited by, we believe, by Ezra. So if Ezra is giving credit to the Levites here, and again, maybe he was using an ancient text, whatever, but he preserved it. He preserved this idea that at least at this time, the Levites were doing better at following the rules than the Kohanim themselves were. So interesting the credit that he gives to the Levites here, doing their job. The Levites are doing their job.
For beside the large number of burnt offerings, there were the fat parts of the sacrifices of well-being and the libations for the burnt offerings, so the service of the house of God was properly accomplished. Hezekiah and all the people rejoiced over what God had enabled the people to accomplish because it had happened so suddenly.
Yeah, and and it was and there was so much stuff that they had to call in reinforcements. You know, they had so many sacrifices, and everybody came out, and it was a wonderful. It was this big big barbecue. So much work, and everybody did what they were supposed to do, which doesn't happen a lot in the Bible. And so this is a great example of people doing the right thing, and uh, yeah, they're cooperating, and it's not typical, unfortunately. Yes, Reverend Lynn. Yeah. Well, what seems to have happened was that the priests and the Kohanim both had to go through a process of purification, and either the priests, the Kohanim, weren't doing it fast enough, they weren't doing it properly, and they were being judged as. So let's say, look, these are the Kohan. As I said, these are priests that are deciding this, by the way, and the priests wrote this. What might have happened? It seems like what happened was that the priests were supposed to come and go through this process of purification while they're going through this reformation, and the priests are either not coming out, and enough of them are coming out for this, or they are not doing it to the satisfaction of the priests who were in charge. And so the priests in charge are saying these guys are not doing what they're supposed to be doing. Our own people aren't doing it. The Levites are doing a better job of it than we are. And so they're calling out their own people to sanctify the rest of the people. Yeah, so they have to go through this process. We know about the process because we read about it in the book of Leviticus. Leviticus talks about the ways the priests have to purify themselves through the rituals of, sprinkling blood and well, bathing and then sprinkling blood and going through this purification. So whatever they were doing, it was not either being done quick enough or being done adequately by the priests who were in charge. Because they're basically saying we didn't have enough of our own people that could do this. With the assumption is they did have enough of their people, they just didn't do it, or they weren't doing it right. So the Levites were doing it, and we needed them. The Levites came in and filled the gap and did this kind of stuff, which kind of begs the question: were the Levites even supposed to be doing this, or did they do it because the Kohanim, there weren't enough of them that were doing the right thing? So yeah, the people had, in order for the people to have their sacrifices be accepted, the priests first had to go through these purifications so that they could do it. And again, it talks about in the book of Leviticus how that is done. And every year at Yom Kippur, the priests would go through that ritual, whether they needed to or not. Of course they needed to, but every year at Yom Kippur was the time that the priests were told to go through this purification ritual. And that's what Yom Kippur was. It was really only for the priests originally. So oh, is there a ritual for it? So what is it a prayer, or is there a washing or something like that? Oils? So Reverend Linda, if you can't hear, she's telling us that in the Episcopal Church every year there's a and well, she said probably because the Episcopal probably got it from the Roman Catholics, that the priests in their religion, because remember, the thing that the Episcopal Church kept, again, that most when we who are not Protestant look at the church, is the churches in America, the Episcopal Church kept the priestly structure, and most of the Protestant churches didn't. Even ones that were attached to the Episcopal or came out of the Episcopal Church, like Methodists and things like that, they don't have the same level of priest, of priestly, yeah. So the Episcopal Church kept that, and that's why, there's more of that priestly. And again, the Catholic Church kept it kind of from us, right? They adapted the priestly, and same in the Eastern Orthodox churches too. They kept some of these things alive, and of course adapted them and changed them and had their own take on them. But the idea of priests going through a yearly ritual, as Reverend Lynn is saying, is something that the Episcopal Church still does. So, yeah, the idea of doing it at Yom Kippur was because when the temple first had when the first temple, which was the Mishkan, the tabernacle, got impure, got completely wrecked by the sacrifices of Nadav and Avihu when they offer up these alien fire, which was 8 days after the Mishkan was first dedicated, that they have to go through and they have to purify it, because this brand new Mishkan was ruined, which is crazy, by the way, if you think about it. Like, the Mishkan was good for 8 days and then it got ruined, which, is like, you open up you have a new house and then there's a flood in the house 8 days later. That's how messed up that was. Well, the ritual that they did to purify it, which is talked about in Achrei Mot, the portion Achrei Mot, that is what we do at Yom Kippur, which is why we read that portion from Achrei Mot again, is because the Torah says, and you do this every year. So just like we did it just now for Nadav and Avihu cleanup, you're going to do a cleanup every year. So I will say that the focus on the priest is something that, we don't even think about anymore. So we are going to finish up with this chapter 30, which is not the end of Hezekiah's story, but we'll have read a couple chapters, as you can see, about Hezekiah. There's more happening here than we have with these previous guys who sometimes had 9 verses. Even the good guy, even Yotam, his grandfather, had only 9 verses. So here we go with a little bit more, another chapter about Hezekiah.
Hezekiah sent word to all Israel and Judah. He also wrote letters to Ephraim and Manasseh to come to the house of God in Jerusalem to keep the Passover for the eternal God of Israel. The king and his officers and the congregation in Jerusalem had agreed to keep the Passover in the 2nd month, for at the time they were unable to keep it, for not enough priests had sanctified themselves, nor had the people assembled in Jerusalem.
Yes, and this is where we get a tradition of something called Pesach Sheni, the second Passover. So if you look at a calendar, it'll sometimes you'll say, "What does Pesach Sheni mean in my Jewish calendar?" That's what this is. It was a Passover for people who couldn't keep it during the time of Passover, during the first month, the month of spring, the month of Aviv. So the next month they would keep it. It says right here that they kept it then. Why? Because they couldn't do it because they were still purifying themselves the previous month. So they do it the 2nd month, and they bring everybody in to do it, including people from the north, including people from Ephraim, right? You guys come down, right? Ephraim and Manasseh, you guys come down and you celebrate with us in Jerusalem. We're going to have a huge Passover. We're going to have this huge Passover. It's not at the right time this year because we couldn't, but now we can. So come on down to Jerusalem. So here's what it says.
The king and the whole congregation thought it proper to issue a decree and proclaim throughout all Israel from Beersheba to Dan that they come and keep the Passover for the eternal God of Israel in Jerusalem. Not often did they act in accord with what was written.
So it seems as though we never really did the right thing. And now we're going to do the right thing. And we don't. And the judgment there in parentheses too is, they didn't oftentimes do the right thing. But they did today. They did for this Passover. We're going to bring everybody down. Now, we did not read about this in the book of Kings. If you forgot, or I don't remember if I read it in the Kings, you did not. because it's not in the book of Kings. This Passover that we read about is not there. And it seems to imply that like they really weren't keeping Passover, at least in the temple. It's kind of mind-boggling that that's how off the rails things had gone. So even when it talked about kings being good, it seems that like since the time of Solomon, these kings have not been doing what they're supposed to be doing. The 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 Now again, you could say, well, it's the priest's job to do it. But yeah, if the king doesn't legislate it, if he doesn't tell everybody you're going to come, if he doesn't tell everybody you got to bring sacrifices, no one's going to do it. So it shows you that when it talks about the kings not doing what they're supposed to be doing, yeah, maybe this is what they're talking about. Even if they were good kings, even if they didn't let Baal statues in, were they really doing what they were supposed to be doing? Because again, it doesn't seem like they were celebrating Passover, which is a pretty important holiday. And we always think, like, well, gosh, Jews have always been keeping Passover all the way back to Moses, right? All the way back to Egypt. It seems like when we had a chance to keep it, we weren't keeping it, or at least we weren't keeping it in the temple. We weren't doing the sacrifices that we were supposed to be doing at Passover. So it's a little interesting that we read this and we're like, well, what did our ancestors actually do? Or at least for a few hundred years. I mean, we're talking, by the way, here about this is over 200 years since the time of Solomon to the time of Hezekiah. This is about 730, and Solomon lived around 930. So this is like 200 years. What were they doing? All right.
The couriers went out with the letters from the king and his officers through all Israel and Judah by order of the king, proclaiming, O you Israelites, return to the eternal God of your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, and God will return to the remnant of you who escaped from the hand of the kings of Assyria. Do not be like your ancestors and kindred who trespassed against the eternal God of their ancestors and were turned into a horror, as you see. Now do not be stiff-necked like your ancestors. Submit yourself to God and come to the sanctuary that has been consecrated forever and serve the eternal your God, whose anger may hopefully turn back from you. If you return to God, your brothers and children will be regarded with compassion by their captors and will return to this land. The eternal your God, being gracious and merciful, will not turn away from you if you return.
So this is a beautiful message of hope to the people who were living during the time of the Assyrians. They're watching what's happening. They're scared. The Syrians are at any time can destroy them. They know that, so they're scared. But look, there's a real sense that this is actually not. It's not a message for those people. It's a message for the people that Ezra is talking to. I mean, look at this. This doesn't even seem to like the mentality of this doesn't even seem to be the mentality of people who are living during that time. It's like the mentality of the people that are living during Ezra's time, who've returned from exile from Babylonia and are being told, folks, God will be with you if you come back. This over and over again with return to the land, right? This doesn't seem to be to a community that hasn't been exiled yet. It seems to be really to the community that had been exiled. And so there really is this feeling like this is a message for his people, not so much well, we screwed up and now we're being punished, which is the Jeremiah message. But this is the message to people who have returned and God is going to forgive you because you're going to do it in the right way.
As the couriers passed from town to town in the land of Ephraim and Manasseh till they reached Zebulun, they were laughed at and mocked. Some of the people of Asher and Manasseh and Zebulun, however, were contrite and came to Jerusalem. The hand of God was on Judah, too, making them of a single mind to carry out the command of the king and officers concerning the ordinance of God. A great crowd assembled at Jerusalem to keep the feast of unleavened bread in the second month, a very great congregation. They set to and removed the altars that were in Jerusalem, and they removed all the incense stands and threw them into the Wadi Kidron. They slaughtered the Passover sacrifice on the 14th of the second month. The priests and Levites were ashamed, and they sanctified themselves and brought burnt offerings to the house of God. They took their stations, as was their rule according to the teaching of Moses, agent of God. The priests dashed the blood that they received from the Levites. Since many in the congregation had not sanctified themselves, the Levites were in charge of slaughtering the Passover sacrifice for everyone who was not pure, so as to consecrate them to God.
And that is the people had to go through a purification ritual because Passover is the only sacrifice that's done by the people, right? Because on most holidays, on every day and on Shabbat, people would go to the priest and they would sacrifice the animals in the temple, but not Passover. Passover is actually a sacrifice that a family makes. The head of the household would sacrifice the lamb for everybody. But this tells us that the people had to go through a purification in order to do that. So the Levites helped the people be purified so that they could make their own Passover offering, so they could do the Passover. So assumedly, they're like all around Jerusalem sacrificing their own lambs and having the Passover meal. They did it in Jerusalem, though, which obviously means that they're also sacrificing stuff in Jerusalem on the main altar, but everybody's doing their own. Everyone's doing their own Passover sacrifice. Yeah, even before the destruction of the temple. So this was fulfillment of the Torah, and that's what it says. It says it's in the Torah, the teaching of Moses. It's another way of saying Ketorat Moshe. This is the Torah of Moshe, Ish Elohim, the man of God, the agent of God. It's fine, I don't care. Ish Elohim, the man of God. That's what he taught us. We have the Passover sacrifice. And that's what it says in Exodus. We're supposed to have the Passover offering is supposed to be done by the head of the household. Now, look, what was the sacrifice part? It was, of course, we ate part of it, but we also burned it, right? We burned all the leftovers. All the other parts of the cow were burned, which is exactly what the priests do. So the Passover offering was always like a homebound sacrifice. Only people who do it like that today are the Samaritans who live in Israel today, and they do a sacrifice every year on Passover. Each household does their own sacrifice, and so they have hundreds. They're only all Samaritans now. They're good and bad. All the Samaritans. There aren't many of them. I think there's like 700 left, but they do the sacrifice just like the Torah tells them to. They said, we got to. The Torah tells us. So assumedly they are purified, though. Whether they're good or bad, they're purified enough that they can do it. So at this point, the Levites are sanctifying them, and they still have priests. The Samaritans identify people in their community who are priests. So some of the people from the north came down.
For most of the people, many from Ephraim and Manasseh, Issachar and Zebulun had not purified themselves, yet they ate the Passover sacrifice in violation of what was written. Hezekiah prayed for them, saying, "The good God will provide atonement for all who set their mind on worshiping God, the eternal God of their ancestors, even if they are not purified for the sanctuary." God heard Hezekiah and healed the people. The Israelites who were in Jerusalem kept the Feast of Unleavened Bread 7 days with great rejoicing, the Levites and the priests praising God daily with powerful instruments for God. Hezekiah persuaded all the Levites who performed skillfully for God to spend the 7 days of the festival making offerings of well-being and confessing to the eternal God of their ancestors. All the congregation resolved to keep 7 more days, so they kept 7 more days of rejoicing.
Wow, that's amazing. They did turn it into a 14-day holiday. That's a really long holiday.
King Hezekiah of Judah contributed to the congregation 1,000 bulls and 7,000 sheep, and the officers contributed to the congregation 1,000 bulls and 10,000 sheep, and the priests sanctified themselves in large numbers. all the congregation of Judah and the priests and the Levites and all the congregation that came from Israel and the resident aliens who came from the land of Israel and who lived in Judah rejoiced. There was great rejoicing in Jerusalem, for since the time of King Solomon, son of David of Israel, nothing like it had happened in Jerusalem. The Levite priests rose and blessed the people, and their voice was heard, and their prayer went up to God's holy abode, to heaven.
Yeah. Now, what's interesting about this is amazing. This is an amazing, uh, amazing incident that we know nothing about from the book of Kings. So next week, I'm actually going to show you this. And again, this is why I love this is something I'm telling you that AI helped me do in a matter of seconds, something that I don't know if I could have ever done. I mean, I could have, but it would have taken me many months. I went through, it went through and was able to create, a comparison between what's talked about in Hezekiah in these chapters, right? We're in 29 through 30. Right now we're 31. We're going into what's there and what's not there. And this wonderful this wonderful Passover celebration in Kings, it's not mentioned. And here it's a whole chapter. There's a whole chapter of Chronicles isn't mentioned. Some stuff is barely mentioned, right? The Levites and priests going through this kind of thing. No, in Kings it mentions that there's a renewal of them. Here, there's this wonderful story about how the priests needed help from the Levites were helping them. It's not there, and again, it is in Chronicles. And this whole thing about how the temple is rededicated and all these wonderful things. This is probably because, again, the book of Chronicles is written by people who want our temple, the second temple, to be rebuilt, and they want it to be beautiful, just like what Hezekiah did. So they really use it as a model. We'll talk more about it next week. But there's interesting things that are not in the book of Chronicles, which are wonderful stories from Kings, which I'll remind you of, which are not there, especially when we get into the Assyrians. And so one of the most important things in the final evaluation, Hezekiah in the book of Kings is definitely one of the best, but he's still got some flaws, some pretty serious. I mean, I would say they're problems. But in the book of Chronicles, Hezekiah is like, I will tell you, he's better than King David. He's better than King Solomon because he doesn't make these mistakes. And so we are going to read about his illness. But yeah, we'll see it in the next couple of weeks, the next couple of chapters. We really have like 2 more weeks, and then we're going to go back to the beginning. We're going back to the beginning, my friends. So thank you, Rosemary, for taking us through these chapters of Hezekiah. And again, hope everybody. We were just talking about how great the rain is, but we hope you. Maybe we had enough rain. Maybe we had enough. It's hard to drive in this when it's every day, and every day raining like this. But we hope you have a great rest of the week, and we will see you. If you're around, please join us tomorrow night. We're going to be looking at on Wednesday night at the Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, which we kind of all group together as the Kabbalah, but we'll be talking about it as a system, as a history, as a part of our living tradition. So that is tomorrow night. The next 3 nights, next 3 Wednesdays will be on Kabbalah. So we'll also be in person and online next week. So take care, everybody, and we'll see you soon.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Bye.